Okay, let's talk about which path or class is best for you when starting out with Lies of P. Now, my gut is, after passing through the beginning area a couple of times, and having done it at least once with each class now, the Path of Balance definitely gives you the easiest start to the game. Mostly because of the weapon. It has the nice slashy sword moveset, which is just really easy to get around with. And it has enough damage mitigation when it blocks that it isn't too punishing if you don't get your parries off all of the time. Now, I personally think the Dexterity class, the Path of the Bastard, has the best stat spread at the beginning, mostly because your heals aren't that high that you need heightened vitality right out of the gate. So you're losing out on some damage, or let's say repeatable advantages, such as stamina that's going to regenerate and damage through that, in comparison to just the extra little bit of health capacity you get with the sweeper. The reason I say this is because, generally speaking, combat, especially at the beginning, isn't so fast that you can't pull back a little bit and heal, which means that the slightly lower health threshold on the Dex start really isn't an issue. What is an issue on the Dex start is the lack of blocking ability on the rapier. So this is a far less forgiving start, because if you do miss the parry and end up blocking, you're going to take way more damage than either of the other two, which compounds with its lessened health, make you much more vulnerable if you can't get the parries off. However, it does have good reach. And something else that needs saying about both the Balance and the Dexterity classes is the charge up move on these two handles, because that's what dictates the moveset, the handle of the weapon, has a forward step to it, or a forward movement to it that gives you some forward momentum, and they are multi-hit charge ups. What this means is, so long as you can get that last hit to connect when an enemy is in a vulnerable state, you can drop them into the critical state so that you can get the damage on them. And because they have that reach, you can start it from a little bit further away and land it far easier than you can with the strength build, which is something I was testing out on the very first, police enemy that we had. And this one struggles way more to land those charged hits that you need to open enemies up to critical hits. Now, I must say that I prefer the handle on this weapon and the blade on this weapon, even though it slows it down a little bit, because that's a pretty nice combo. When you are mixing the weapons around later on in the game, you can mitigate things like scaling and stuff like this. So the last thing that probably needs talking about is the idea of min-maxing. Respecking is possible in this game. So your stats are not locked, which means the stat you are most likely to spec either out of or into is Advance. And so therefore, that's probably the one you want to start with the lowest, because if you decide you're going to play with Advance, which is basically elemental damage scaling, you can spec into it. And then if you want to spec out of it and go back to physical, you want your Advance to be the lowest it can be. Which realistically means, on a min-max basis, the Dex class, for all that it is the toughest start, is probably the best stat spread long term for the sake of basically a couple of stat points. But overall, the Balance is the easier start, even if its stat spread isn't quite as efficient, in my opinion, mostly because it's got that extra point in Advance. The fact that its stats are spread across motivity and technique is kind of irrelevant, because the handles can be changed so that the scaling can match your stats. So whichever stat you decide to use for your main physical damage, whether it's what would historically be called quality, dex, or strength, that doesn't really lock you out of any weapons, because you can change the scaling on them anyway. So I hope that gives you some information as to which one maybe you want to start out with. It'd be interesting to know what your guys' thoughts are, which one you're going to start out with. But from my testing and my kind of playing through. This one is probably the toughest start and gets the least advantages, whilst this one gets the easiest start, but probably, I think, a little bit less good stat spread. The Dex class is getting the best start, but is a little bit tougher early on, mostly because it can't mitigate damage very well with blocking. Either way, I hope that helps you guys out, and I'll see you all in the next video.